Alright, it's another day, video's about to go up, and I'd like to make one small addendum. A little later in the video, I note that there's a difference between rapatio and rape without ever giving context to what rapatio itself means. Rapatio, at least in the context of the sources I found, literally meant kidnapping or capture, and that was it. But I feel like it was important to add this addendum because I don't know the context of Rapatio, I just know that it's different. Thanks. Enjoy the video. Greetings, I'm back with another late video, and I'm getting better at that. This video is going to be a bit of a three-part video with the Rapatio of the Sabine women, the myth of Tarpeia and the Tarpeian rock, as well as a lot of the myth and history of the Sabine War, all rolled into one video. I promise I'm not going to be doing nothing but Roman mythology from this point forward, but starting in with Romulus and Remus really put me on the Roman kick, and because Roman mythology is so interesting, the native Roman mythology is so practical, so history book, and its focuses and supernatural elements seem to just highlight Romans' divine right to rule without any overt gods getting involved. No gods coming down and turning into showers of gold to impregnate a woman or things like that. I wanted to keep this dive into Roman mythology going a little bit longer. So a quick note before I get started: the Cainineses, the Crustamini, and the Amennates are included in this tale along with the Sabine, but for my sake, I'm going to reference them as Sabine, unless I otherwise don't, which means I reference them as non-Sabine a good chunk of the time. The first myth we're going to get started with is the Rapatio of the Sabine women. Sabine rapate in actual Latin, pronunciation pending. But I'm going to use Rapatio whenever I refer to it because the English translation is rape, and the context between rapatio and rapate is not the same as how we use the word rape in English language today. So, not long after the founding of Rome, Romulus and his mostly male followers had been building their city and had made a name for themselves as a very strong, powerful city in the region. But they realized that in order for Rome to grow, they needed women. They had built a large city, they built it intentionally so that their population could fill it in. And they attempted to negotiate with their neighboring peoples for wives. They went to all of the previously mentioned civilizations as well as the Sabine, and they were either snubbed out of pride or snubbed because they did not wish to help a rival who had shown such alarming growth and strength already in their history. Romulus, in answer to this essentially rebuke and snub of his people, came up with a plan and declared a annualized festival in honor of Neptunus Equester, Consuelia, as he would later be called by the Romans. He had this festival proclaimed among all of the neighboring peoples, specifically targeting the ones who had rebuked him, calling them to come to Rome and join in the festival. Livy records that the whole of the Sabine population was in attendance, along with a great many of the Canisius, Crustamini, Amennates, and when they arrived, they were taken to the houses of Rome, granted hospitality all across the city by all families and everything. And Livy again claims they were astounded by the location and power of Rome. At the height of the festival, and on a given signal, Roman youth went wild, abducting unwedded Sabine women as well as the rest of the tribes, and fought off their families, and those of great beauty were of course carried to the senators of Rome, but a great many women were taken in all across Rome by all classes of citizens. Now it's important to note that Livy is very adamant that there was no sexual assault taking place on this night. Not just him, several other sources agree. But I'll get to that at the end. Romulus himself is said to have gone to the captured women individually, personally, or as a group. It's not clear. And claims and explains to them that the incident as a whole is a result of their parents' pride for refusing to intermarry with their neighbors and promising them, again according to Livy, that they would be lawfully wedded and enjoy a share of all their possessions and civil rights, a thing dearer than all else to the human race, and the society of their common children if they would accept the Romans as their husbands. It is recorded to have worked, especially as Livy again says, the blandishments of the husbands were added, who excused what had been done on a plea of passion and love, a form of entreaty that works most successfully on the feelings of women. I'm going to leave that alone. Yeah, I'm going to leave that alone. Outraged by this disregard for the conventions of hospitality, which is sacred across the world and in so many cultures, and at the kidnapping of the daughters, all three tribes besieged the Sabine king to go to war. The Sabines being the local supreme power. Through various differences, impatience, stupidity, the Canesis attacked alone and were crushed. Romulus laid the slave king and general of the Canesis, that word is just, down in a newly marked area as offerings to Jupiter and his temple. This is also the founding of the first temple of Rome. Livy notes that from this point on, it was the will of the gods that Romulus should never be maligned or misspoken of, and that in offerings such as Romulus's spolia opima should never be commonplace. He notes that something like 3 people since then had ever been given the right to provide an offering as grand as that to the god, to Jupiter. The Anteum Nates struck while the Roman army was occupied with the Caenines, capturing lost territory, only to come under attack and lose to a hastily marshaled Roman army from Rome. With 2 major enemies crushed, Romulus's wife, Hersilia, convinced him to pardon the fathers of the captured women and grant them rights of citizenship. With this act of benevolence, Hersilia sought to avert the discontent among the newly conquered people of Rome and forge them into one community. And since many of them had daughters who now were women of Rome instead of their own tribe, it worked. The tribes came together under the banner of Rome itself. The Crustumini, morally weakened by the disasters of the other 2 tribes, fell quickly to Roman military might, and the Roman colony of Crustuminium was founded in their land. Again, the families of the kidnapped women migrated to Rome under the same amnesty as the prior enemies of Rome. And Crustuminium was a major grain and wheat producing farmland for Rome from this point forward. When the Sabines attacked, they did it with a carefully gathered strength. And then this is where the second myth comes into tale. The tale behind the Tarpeian Rock, the place where traitors were traditionally executed. Tarpeia was the daughter of the Roman commander of the citadel on Capitoline Hill, who allowed herself to be bribed into opening the gates of the citadel to the Sabines, and when the Sabines entered, they crushed her to death by tossing their shields on top of her. There are several versions of the myth, and they change Tarpeia's character dramatically, though not how she dies. The most famous of these has her as a vapid, greedy girl who became deeply enamored with the beautiful gold bracelets the Sabines wore on their left arms, and so she demands that they give her what is on their left arm, thinking that it will be bracelets, and instead finds shields. Another argues she intended to trick them by letting them in only if they gave up their shields and thus leaving them undefended to her father's soldiers, and that the Sabines, realizing it's a trick, crush her to death with their shields. Or the Sabines crush her to death because they couldn't trust a Roman who betrayed her own people. Even Livy notes that all 3 of these are an option, and is unsure, admittedly is unsure why she opened the gates. Regardless of the reason, when the Romans found her body, they realized that she must be a traitor, and tossed her body off a high cliff, which they later named the Rock of Tarpeia. To be executed in this manner, thrown off the Tarpeian rock, added the additional stigma of shame, and so was a fate worse than death. Branding the person as a murderer or a traitor of the highest order, and thus tainting their name in history. Now we note the last things of the Sabine War. The Roman assault on the citadel, attempting to recapture it with the Sabines inside, actually fails, and the Sabines sally forth from the citadel, chasing the Roman army. In the fleeing, Romulus is being dragged along by his men, offers up a prayer to Jupiter, and feeling as though he has been heard, shouts, "From this position, O Romans, Jupiter, greatest and the best, bids you halt and renew the fight." And the Roman army is said to have stopped their rout at once, turning and fighting, as if a god had pushed them forward. The Sabines, who are now in the valley between the seven hills of Rome, find themselves at a disadvantage, and begin, as the armies reform and prepare to fight. Seeing this state of affairs, the Sabine women and the women of Rome in general are said to have flung themselves between the two armies, pleading that both sides lay down their arms, saying, "It will be better for us to have perished than to live widowed or orphans without one or the other of you." This has a great effect on the combatants of both sides, for husband and father stood on opposite sides of the battlefield. Such impassioned pleas moved the leaders of both sides to come together and form a treaty in which Rome took sovereign power, and the Sabines were given the name Curets, and the land named Cures, after their king Metis Curetes, who had almost won the day. Now, it feels like I just read you a history book, doesn't it? Not mythologies that you would expect. That, again, is the very unique part of Roman mythology that it keeps in lacking significant deity players. Unlike the Greek myths with the gods impregnating people or killing them at will, directly interacting with mortals, early Roman mythology is simply attributing things to the gods. It's very much more what we in modern times seem to do with our god, or gods, depending on your choice. And later Roman mythology, as they tie themselves to the great civilizations of Greece, begins adopting that direct mortal intervention. They essentially just copy the Greek mythology into their own society, as well as adopting everybody else's along the way. The closest thing you get to a miracle is the women's acceptance of Romulus's pleas, and Jupiter's seeming intervention during the final battle of the war. Both of which can be explained as just luck and timing, although the women one is still a miracle to me. Historians use these same myths as sources for the founding of Rome, and Livy especially, because they are some of the only records to have survived, but also they read in a way that is very much history. Although they do favor Rome, as any well-written history book will. What is interesting also is that these myths establish the role of women in Roman society as more active and legally protected than we consider women of the ancient era, and indeed how many of the Dark Age women were treated after the fall of the Empire. Though, again, not as advanced as women in modern times, or so we like to think. Hersilia is credited with an idea that allows Rome to flourish, and instead of fomenting rebellion, unifies them as a single people. And the role of the Sabine women in ending the war between their fathers and husbands cannot be overstated. Even Tarpeia, in some telling, was attempting to further Roman cause, as opposed to just looking out for herself, like you get in so much Greek and other mythology about where women come in. The fact that Livy is adamant that the captured women were not raped is something you don't see a lot of in mythology. Generally, in Greek and Roman mythology, a woman is a prize and very little else, or she is Cleopatra type woman who is powerful and mighty and way too dangerous to be messed with, but not a lot in between. These are just random women who are captured, but they are somehow, their sanctity is protected. Generally, rape and pillage of a city is considered par and course in mythology, and even in Roman history, it's still considered par and course. And while this isn't exactly the same situation as a long 5-month siege, the fact that it is noted by a number of sources that these women were not touched is just astounding. Alright, I think this will be my last native Roman mythology. From this point on, I'm going to be dabbling in Asian and Asiatic mythology, because why not? With any luck, my friend's video won't be as late as this one is, again. Anyway, thanks for watching.